absolute delight to see all these faces here with us today, students, professors, esteemed guests, and we look forward to an engaging and informative afternoon ahead. This event is a collaborative effort between the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy and the Jindal India Institute, the first of what we hope will be many more of such enriching collaborations to come. Envisaged during the International Jindal Conference on Applications of Quantum Modeling and Complexity Theory to Economics and Public Policy, held in February of 2020 at JGU, this center came into existence in September of 2020. The center aims to advance teaching, research, and advocacy of public policies and related processes that draw from complexity economics and applied spirituality to foster ecological integrity, social justice, and economic effectiveness. The primary aim of the center is to build networks among interested faculty and students, nationally and internationally, and to develop a community of practice among policymakers and practitioners. The approach is transdisciplinary, drawing from related fields of complexity theory, behavioral economics, psychology, post-growth economics, quantum decision theory, etc. The Jindal India Institute, JII, is the latest university-level initiative of the OP Jindal Global University, established on January 26th of this year. JII is an independent and non-partisan strategic think tank dedicated to ideationally and intellectually enabling India's rise in the world by building and disseminating a transnational, intellectually rigorous, evidence-based, multidisciplinary corpus of knowledge. JII aims to intellectually decolonize the study and depiction of India and spread global awareness about India's extraordinary accomplishments and potential in the 21st century. JII's functioning is facilitated by an executive team of 13 deputy, associate, and assistant directors, and a group of 15 fellows drawn from the JGU faculty, belonging to a range of schools and institutions within the university. In its mere 2.5 months of existence, JII has conducted training sessions for 51 diplomats from 29 countries and international organizations on the intricacies of the Indian elections. This month, JII had the privilege of hosting diplomats from more than 31 countries, further enhancing its engagement with the international community. As we begin this event today, it is our pleasure to have with us today 2 deans of JGU schools to inaugurate the program. To begin, Professor R. Sudarshan is the founding dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy and has decades of experience in public policy across organizations, including the Ford Foundation and the UN Development Program. With a master's degree in economics from the Delhi School of Economics and a master's degree in politics from Oxford, he has also been a research fellow at the University of Cambridge. His portfolio of publications includes books, articles, and UN policy reports which reflect his interdisciplinary research, teaching, and policy experience in development programs, human development, law, governance, institutions, and policy. To give the welcome address, I now invite on stage Professor R. Sudarshan.
Thank you. A very warm welcome to all of you. I'm very pleased that, we've got housed in the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy, thanks to the initiative of Professor Naresh Singh, and we talked about it and hit upon this what might seem to many people a kind of a ragtag association of complexity economics on the one hand. Someone suggested we probably should have many centers instead of Center for Applied Spirituality could be one and complexity another. But the whole point about this is actually trying to find these connections, the synapses, the synergy. And so when you take what at first sight appears to be somewhat disparate, and then when you think and reflect upon it, you can then begin to see connections. And that's the whole point. So the book that we are going to discuss, which is an outcome of the efforts of the team that the editors, whom I'm grateful for, Professor Naresh Singh and Divya Bhatnagar, who was with the School of Public Policy for a short time, the contents of that book are as disparate as you might have, as people have said about the title of the center, because it covers a range of issues. It's about sustainable development and spirituality, but it's got essays on, quantum-like modeling. It's got essays on Gandhian economics, and it's got essays on what is wisdom and the wisdom traditions of the world. So at first sight, the contents are, very varied, but underlying it is a sense of common pursuit, of a common goal, and a common conviction that it's time and important to understand, given the dire straits in which the world is, which the planet Earth is facing, that and the extraordinary dominance of the one species of life on the planet, which is human beings, and the fact that the extraordinary thing about human beings is consciousness, that there must be answers to facing and overcoming the predicament that we are in, at the edge of an abyss, so to speak, by a serious exploration of how these different fields which have a common quest. So it's not surprising that the great physicists who've advanced that discipline have also been greatly interested in consciousness, and it's also the case that in the philosophical traditions of the East, not to say that the philosophical traditions of the West are not important, but in terms of how much attention and study and time is devoted, the Eastern schools of, whether it's Taoism, or Buddhism, or Vedanta, or Advaita, or Vishishta Advaita, all of these have not got the attention that they need to get, because there are insights in them, and this enterprise is an attempt to bring those perspectives. So there is a saying that at one level it begins with individuals, but then public policy is about collectives. So at one understanding of spirituality is it's one's own quest, and you find a state of consciousness which seems to be different from the here and now and the mundane existence, and you've reached another state. But then if you asked a person, describe the other state, I once heard J. Krishnamurti was asked that question, can you tell me what is it to be enlightened? And he seemed to be a bit rude, but he had a meaning to what he said. He said, why don't you remain not knowing? Because what he was saying is that it's a kind of state that you can't put in words, because if you could put it, it's like the wheel. Once you could describe the wheel, it's already been invented, right? There was no wheel before. So you don't have the language to convey it. It has to be a subjective experience. So that's at one level. But then you have the saying that yatha anda anda tata pinda anda. The macrocosm is like the microcosm, right? And therefore, this understanding of the microcosmic and the macrocosm, that leap is where you move from an individual reflecting upon what is the meaning of all this, why am I in this world, to how can we make societies, communities flourish? What are the values and virtues that need to be inculcated in the constituent members of such a society, that society as a whole flourishes? So that's the kind of interplay that we are looking for, and this book is a great start, and I'm very happy that we are all here to celebrate it and to get more people to read different chapters. Not everyone would be interested in all of the chapters, but that's the whole idea, that we get a sense of the coherence that a volume like this achieves quite extraordinarily. And that's why I have to compliment the selection of the authors and the editors for the job they've done with this book. So thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your words of welcome and insight into the reasons for the center's existence. We shall have next the opening remarks for the afternoon by Professor Sriram Cholia, Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs. Dr. Sriram Cholia is a social scientist and opinion maker on international issues. He holds a doctorate and master arts in political science and international relations from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs, Syracuse University. He holds an MSc degree in History of International Relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Since his time at JGU, Professor Cholia has hosted the weekly International Indian Diplomacy TV show on India's national broadcaster DD India and has been cited in the world media for his analytical articles on pressing current affairs and issues. Sir, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Namaste, everyone. On behalf of the Jindal India Institute, we are really pleased and delighted to be involved in the campus launch of this important book. It's very profound, I found, actually, because most of us trained in the social science disciplines tend to be dismissive of non-materialistic explanations and solutions to any problems. There is this overwhelming secularity in our thinking, which is the product of Eurocentric learning and training in the academe for few centuries. So what this book is actually doing, and I must congratulate the editors, Professor Naresh Singh and Divya Bhatnagar, is that we need to unlearn a lot of the accumulated wisdom, or what we thought were wisdom, and face the reality that there is this collapse or crisis, meta crisis, poly crisis, whatever you want to call them, and things are looking worse and worse no matter which issue area you look at today, from ecology to the planetary destruction to wars and displacement and violence and intense human suffering. So what this book is doing, and I've had the fortune of reading a few chapters already, is asking us to rethink the lenses through which we are looking at these issues. Public policy, of course, and development is the theme, but they are looking at a wide variety of issue areas in which we are in big trouble, and we are not able to get out of it because we are applying the learnings derived from highly materialistic and what the authors, many of the authors call dualistic thinking, which is based on the conflict between two opposing phenomena. So instead, they are calling for holism, for non-dualism, based on ancient traditions of many countries, including our own Advaita and Vedanta and all that. And what they're saying is that we will not be able to get out of this mess unless we think about some big transformation which has to do with the inner workings, consciousness, inner self. These kinds of things generally we dismiss, and we generally think this is, a fringe idea and a fringe thing, and this is for those who are, believers and who are into religion and that sort of thing. But what they're showing is there is also something like a civic spirituality which goes beyond formal religions, and Professor Naresh Singh and Divya Bhatnagar are also making a strong case for India to step up and offer that spiritual leadership in the world. And this is, of course, a message that goes back to at least the 19th century, when Swami Vivekananda was of the view that India can lead the world through moral and spiritual example. So what they are now showing is that the time for India to step up and to let its ideas to bring some large-scale paradigmatic transformation is now. So I'm not going to go very deep into the chapters, but please read it, and I do recommend it. There are a variety of spirituality-related topics here, and essentially it's challenging the notion that there is a cause and effect. There is a two opposing sides to every issue, and that there is necessarily conflict, that there is necessarily that human nature is necessarily always accumulative and greedy and acquisitive. So these things I think are very profound, because we are at our wit's end as to what is the solution to this the climate crisis, to the water crisis, to the wars and the violence that are raging all around the world. We are at a complete loss as to what can bring security and peace and contentment, right? So probably we have exhausted the mainstream so-called social science materialistic solutions already. They're not getting us far, and if we think that we have already found the answers through the what we call the positivism, the idea that this is the problem and you apply something and it will solve it, this is the cause and this is the effect. They're challenging, many of the authors in the book are challenging those kind of narratives. They're talking about interconnectedness of all phenomena. They are citing masters of spiritual practice from ancient to contemporary times, and making the claim that it's time to shift our approach to all these problems. So I think that's a powerful argument. It's of course prescriptive. Some of the writers I noticed have also have made their own models based on applied spirituality, and have been implementing it, but in small organizations or institutions or communities, not on a large scale. I would still say that this is on the periphery. What is being argued is more prescriptive, more normative, and more a kind of an advocacy for how we should change our approach to problems of the material world. And it's less a case where these have already been adopted or have already been put into practice by nation states or large social groups. But still, I think the fact that there's something offbeat and out of the box like this out there is enough. I think that in itself is a contribution, and because that enables people to look for those who are looking for solutions, those who are trying to form movements around alternatives. For them, this is a useful start. There have been some movements around the world in many parts of in order to create this alternative consciousness. It's still work in progress, but the alternative consciousness will help, it seems to me, because the hubris with which we in the social science world approached issues thinking, well, this is a law and this is the rule, and this is how people behave, and this is how we can fix broken societies or the broken planet. All those we have obviously exhausted now, and it's not getting us very far. So there is a kind of almost like we are resigned to this collapse. In many ways, it's like a slow death, and we're just waiting for it to come, and unable to really reverse the tide. So I think this is a useful instrument with which we can think about another way or another path, or multiple alternative paths. And perhaps at some level, if a lot of individuals are convinced by this, it automatically becomes a movement for change and can bring about large-scale institutional transformations. But at least the effort, I congratulate Professor Naresh Singh and Divya Bhatnagar for putting it out there and floating this alternative vision. That's very important. And many times because I think especially with the Marxism, Leninism, and from 19th century onwards, we have believed that the materialistic forces determine and shape everything. and that spirituality is for those who are like, renounced everything and who are stepped out of the worldly issues and are become recluses. But what they are showing, interestingly, is that you can apply those ideas not just for nirvana or moksha or for renunciation or for realization of self, but for actual real world issues and problems. So so you need actually a non-materialistic stream of consciousness and thought, it seems, to be able to solve the material world's problems. So that sort of linkage, I think, is very important. And in the spirit of this holism or non-dualism, perhaps even at the level of problems and solutions, the two are inter-causal. And therefore, we need to look at these kind of books and take them more seriously. I hope that the center that we have here, a very unique one. I don't think there's any such center anywhere in India, in any university, applied spirituality. I think this is the, certainly it is seeding an idea for a better future based on different thinking than what we have inherited from the mainstream Eurocentric visions. So one of the chapters I remember was even saying that we need to move to the East, because the Western models of capitalism and of warfare and conquest and all these have already reached their limits in terms of, or even rationality have reached their limits in terms of taking us forward. So let's think about this in a welcome way. Let us be open to these. Let's not be dismissive, I would say, to colleagues who believe that power flows from the barrel of a gun, or that it's all about the configuration of forces or the balance of power that determine all outcomes. Here there's something else being said, which is that we need to come together, and it may sound like a cliche, but they have explained it in a very, very profound way in this book, that there's something that connects all of us, and not just us as humans, but also the natural world and inanimate objects, and that there's something bigger out there. And if we can attain that, maybe we can end this era of polycrisis. So congratulations to the editors, and we are so proud that Professor Naresh Singh is taking this tradition forward here in JGU, not just for the benefit of our students, but for the intellectual community and for the national and international discourse around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your insight into the themes and the ideas of the book. We shall now proceed to the panel discussion portion of the program. Our panelists today are the editors and contributors for the book. We shall begin first with the co-editor, Professor Naresh Singh. Professor Naresh Singh is Professor and Executive Dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy and Director of the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy. He has a transdisciplinary PhD in environmental sciences with more than 3 decades of public policy experience in senior positions in the United Nations and the Federal Government of Canada. Professor Singh's work is wide-ranging, with a focus on decision-making in complex situations, including sustainable livelihoods, international development cooperation, technology policy, and complexity theory. Joining us online is the other co-editor, Ms. Divya Bhatnagar, who is an assistant professor at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at Shiv Nadar University. She completed her master's degree in public policy from the University of Chicago with a focus on international development. Previously, she has worked on education, children's rights, and child poverty at UNICEF in the New York headquarters, as well as in the field of astrophysics at the University of Victoria in Canada. We are joined also today by chapter contributors. We have Professor Pooja Sharma, who is an associate professor at Daulat Ram College, Delhi University, bringing over 2 decades of experience in academia. With a master's degree in economics from Delhi University, Professor Sharma went on to obtain her PhD in energy studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her areas of interest include environmental economics, energy transition, energy security, and human capital studies. Professor Sudeep Patra, the other chapter contributor, is working as an associate professor at the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy and is a founding member of the centre. With a PhD in mathematical modelling and finance from the University of Glasgow in Scotland and a prior physics background, His research works are in the emerging fields of quantum-like modeling, complexity economics, and quantum foundations. His recent works have been in collaboration with pioneering thinkers in these fields, such as Menas Kafatos, Stuart Kaufman, and Partha Ghosh. Finally, we have the moderator for this discussion, Professor Chandan Nandi, who is a graduate of the erstwhile Presidency College Canada and holds a master's degree in history from Delhi University. After 15 years of experience in journalism, he obtained an MA in coexistence and conflict resolution at Brandeis University in Massachusetts. He is interested in investigative reporting, covering conflicts, and approaching social sciences issues from an analytic perspective. I now hand the stage over to you, sir, to continue with the panel discussion.
Thank you, Manasa. Good evening to my colleagues at JSGP, ladies and gentlemen. This is a most intriguing book title as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sure we are going to get a lot out of this conversation that we are going to have tonight. The scheme of today's discussion is that we have 4 contributors, 7 minutes each for them. This is going to be followed by a summarizing of the submissions and posing of questions by myself. That should take about 5 minutes. Following which, we'll have a 10-minute session with a response from the contributors to these questions. And then from 5:20 to 5:30, we'll have questions from the audience. The wrap-up is going to be at 5:50. I welcome all the speakers to this stage, and let's have a great conversation ahead. Thank you.
We will begin first with remarks from Professor Naresh Singh.
Thank you very much, Manasa, and thank you to all those who have spoken before me and welcomed this volume. Thanks to all of you for coming. I will do 3 things briefly. One is to tell you about the motivation for this book. The second is, where are we now? My hope is that the book starts a movement, as I think some of the opening speakers have mentioned. And then I will mention where I think we are headed. So the motivation for the book. See, I started working on the challenges of sustainable development from the very beginning when this concept was articulated internationally at the political stage. And when Brundtland Commission put out Our Common Future in 1987, and then the Rio Conference and so on. I was also at the Second World Climate Conference in 1990 when we took the decision we as humanity and the international community, to negotiate a framework convention for preventing, or now not preventing, but trying to control climate change. I tell you that because after all those years, and it's now, nearly 32 years since 1990, we are not able to make the kind of progress that we said we would. So we went to Paris as an international community. We made some decisions, set some targets, and we are not anywhere near there. The target was that we will stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius if we could. Last year, we exceeded it. And we are on track to increasing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions for a while at least before we can curb them. Why I tell you that story is that over the last 3 decades, I reflected really seriously about 5 years ago, why is it that humanity agrees to do things and then cannot do them. So after 30 years in public policy, in which I've worked, I've had, I must say, the privilege and good fortune to have worked with presidents, prime ministers, and ministers of over 50 countries around the world. I've worked at the grassroots level as well. And then one wonders, what is it that's missing? So I came to the conclusion that what was missing was us. Somehow, people were missing from the equation. And not people in the sense of the way we behave, but the inner dimensions. Somehow we believed that all the problems we had to solve were out there somewhere, and they could be solved out there. Well, now we have to figure out that's not working, so what's missing? And that led me to the conclusion that I needed to first understand who I was. And having done that kind of journey, then what can I do about what I had learned? I could stay quietly in a corner and job karo, as they say here in India, or I could go out and do something. So I took the latter path, that I might go out and do something. And so the first thing that I thought I'd do is to reflect on what I had learned and what had been taught in the world for more than 3,000 years. Why is it we cannot use this wisdom in what we do? And in my own field of public policy, might it be some connection? How do we do that? And that's difficult stuff to do. First thing, of course, is that in the social sciences, in order to publish something, that something has to be, if you like, academically rigorous. It has to be so-called objective as far as possible, and so on. So the first question was, is inner knowing valid social science? So we had even to solve that issue. Having gotten enough evidence to solve that, we then went on to thinking, now how do we make this applicable and link it to public policy? And what I learned rather quickly was don't try to do it generically across public policy, but pick a public policy area and then see how you can apply it and do it there. And the sustainable development challenges was a ripe enough and broad enough area for us to do this. So that's the kind of background to this book, why we did it. And when we did that, I looked for people who were doing or thinking about these issues. I was pleasantly surprised to find that there were others who were working on this subject. One colleague who wrote a chapter, he has a book. He's from France, and he has a book called The Politics of Being. Now, all the political economy that most of us have studied is about the politics of having. So this book was about the politics of being. That caught my attention. He's now a close collaborator, and he's even heading up the UNDP Conscious Food Systems Alliance. So things are happening. It's moving out of, if you like, the mandir, and it's getting out to the broader society. Then we have another colleague from the IADA School of Business in Barcelona. He wrote a book called Buddhist and Taoist Systems Thinking for Sustainable Development. Again, something that we can use. So we've done all of this, and now to concretize it, we are teaching a course, and many of my students are here, on applied spirituality and sustainable development policy. We are doing a bunch of papers, and the book is here. But what I learned very recently, just a little light bulb went off, and I made the statement in Geneva 2 weeks ago on the 5th of April, and the statement was that evidence-based public policy needs both science and spiritual wisdom. So I've reflected for a long time on evidence-based policy making, as one would imagine, and then it clicked. And I'll tell you in one line now. I guess when you figured it out, you can say it in one line. You don't need a whole book. The evidence-based policy has to have data, that we know, information and knowledge, and hopefully wisdom. Well, we have a lot of data. We have less information. We have even less knowledge, and we have zero wisdom in that equation. This book and this movement that I hope the book is launching is about getting the missing wisdom part into the evidence-based equation that we need. I tried that out at the UN in Geneva. People seem to have loved it. Lots of good feedback, people wanting to become involved. So where are we now? We have just started a small informal network on spirituality, science, and public policy. And that's growing quite rapidly as well. And we welcome all of you who would wish to join that as we do webinars and we do brainstorming and we write papers and blogs and so on to get the ideas out there. And where are we headed? So I've told you about the motivation for the book. Maybe I should tell you, apart from helping to edit this book, I wrote a chapter in the book, and that chapter is called Spiritual Leadership. And when you study leadership in depth, if you look at the Sage Handbook on Leadership, you find 36 different leadership styles. There is authentic leadership, and there is servant leadership, and there is democratic and participatory leadership. There is transformative leadership, but there is also transactional leadership, which is most dominant in the world. So when you look at what must shift, ethical systems must shift. They must shift from utilitarian ethics and deontological ethics to ontological ethics. Leadership has to shift from transactional through transformational and on to what one might call spiritual leadership. So we've identified what needs to shift, and we now need to do it. So the future for me has to have this kind of work and thinking. We hope to form networks of different universities around the world, but hopefully first we might form some in India. I am looking forward to this partnership that we have been developing with the Jindal India Institute, where I'm a senior fellow. I'm proudly a senior fellow as well, with our Director General here. And hopefully by these partnerships, the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy and our Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy can network and hopefully lead this transformation so that we don't, as humanity, fall over the cliff where we seem to be headed. So that's my little intro to the book. I hope you will join us as we move forward on this journey. Thank you.
I next call upon Ms. Divya Bhatnagar, who has joined us online.
Organizing such discussions and taking part in similar events, we are in fact participating in a global movement, in my opinion, an endeavor in which all of us are striving to foster and encourage some very fundamental values of compassion, awareness, resilience, and sustainability in ourselves, and not just in ourselves, our society. And ultimately, we want to see some impact in how our institutions are built and the policy apparatus, how policies are analyzed, how policies are formulated, and how they're monitored. So, so we are all together in this. But the big question is, why do we need to do all of this? And what compels us to come together like this, join hands, and imagine a new generation? So in my view, it is because presently the underlying values influencing our civilization, the way we think, the way we work, the way we consume, and in our conversations, in our mindsets, it's a concoction, and I would say a bitter concoction of fear, ego, greed, desire for power. And one of the strongest factors in my view is the strong sense of disconnect. You are different from me, you are separate from me. This thought, this comes very natural to us. And if you think deeply about this, where is it coming from? Then we'll realize that it is coming from our entire focus on physical world, our physical reality and the external world, and not really questioning, are we really different? Are we really separate? We are taught to, think for ourselves, take care of ourselves first, and then, think about others. So the result of this dominant pattern of mindset, this kind of thinking, which is prevalent nowadays, is a discordant, incoherent undertone to all our policies and our future visions and the way we collaborate and cooperate. In fact, the of cooperation and collaboration, I would say. So that's why I believe that it is high time we shift the focus to our inner dimensions to rethink about runs through all of us and to really meditate on the most fundamental and profound spiritual principle, one of my favorite spiritual principle of unity and realizing the oneness, our interconnectedness, our interdependence of the entire universe, not just with other human beings, but with other beings, with nature itself. And I can say that this whole concept, if I have to, say it in one word, I think it is encapsulated in the concept of holism. So, uh, Professor Singh has talked about the book. Some words that I gathered from the audio. He was talking about the different chapters of the book. So maybe I can highlight a little bit of my thinking, my thought on this book, and also my chapter with Professor Sudeep Patra, which is called A Holistic View to Approach Sustainable Development. So we are exploring this concept and how it can be applied to public policy and sustainable development. So our aim in this chapter was to connect science, spirituality, and policy. And in this way, we discovered that concepts similar to holism, they have popped up separately, independently, across time, across cultures, across space, and thinkers and religions. So it has, we talk about philosophy, sociology, education, physics. Physics, Professor Patra will talk about it a little more. To finding its root in India's Vedic tradition and usage also in Roman and Greek culture. So it's not a one-time event, but it has been seen in science and spirituality both. From in our chapter, we give examples from science, physics, and mathematics, wisdom traditions such as Hinduism, Islam, Taoism, Baha'is faith, and we give example from medicine. So, just a short example, there were two school of thoughts in medicines in 1900s. One school of thought considered that we can treat a body part in isolation, without worrying about the other body parts. But the second school of thought argued that our body is a complex adaptive system itself, and if you have to treat one part, you have to see how the surgery reacts to the other parts of the body, how the mind reacts to it. You'll notice this when somebody goes in surgery, they are checked for all other body parts, and they are checked for all other health issues. So the integration and the interdependence of our body, mind, and our spirit. The second school of thought in medicine was found that it was much more practical, and it was adopted. Now it's a common knowledge that this is how medicine works. So there are other examples as well. For example, in the chapter by Thomas Legrand, Politics of Being, his book, he gives an example. This example struck with me, and that's why I'm mentioning it. It says if you look around, the chair you are sitting on, the mic, you are using to speak in, the table, the room, the wood, they have all come to you from contribution of several human beings, non-human beings, animal, plants, and the nature itself. I'll give you one example. So the laptop, I was thinking about the example that I can give. In his book, he gives an example of a page. So the laptop I am joining from, it is made up of, or any phone that people online are joining from, it is made up of 30 different raw materials mined and extracted from earth. and such as silica, iron, aluminium. Now these are processed by different set of people. They're assembled, and the software is installed by different set of engineers and different set of people who install it, and then it is sold to us in a different country and it comes to us. So when you are touching this laptop, this phone, you're actually coming in interaction with not just human beings who have made this phone or laptop, but also the plants or the animals that nourish that tree or that part of earth. So uh, it's easy to see when we think about it that we are all actually very interconnected and interdependent. Our whole being is composed of our interdependence on each other. If I say, a person X is independent and can be seen in isolation, it's a myth. So the point is that it is critical that we also base a pursuit for sustainable development on this realization, on this interdependence, and on something that is more stable and profound, as opposed to ephemeral factors such as ego and fear. All the dimensions of sustainability have to be considered together: social, economic, and environmental. And it is more sensible to think about SDGs from this perspective of interconnectedness and as a whole complex system of framework, as opposed to our current sorry of our current approach of putting them in 17 separate silos, and you see progress on each SDG that doesn't really talk about the progress in other SDGs. So maybe we can think about sustainable development goals, sustainable development as a concept in this way. So my hope is that this approach will influence policies and politics, and it will make them more inclusive and integrative. For example, if I have to take, if I have to imagine something in education sector, applying spirituality, then a comprehensive education framework will recognize that there is a diversity in learning trajectories of students, and it will invest more in personalized learning. And I would say it will reconsider the grade hierarchy, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12, and the grading system itself, which is so ingrained in our education system, not just in Asia, in India, but across the globe. So, similar understanding should guide comprehensive, holistic policy making for health, economic policies, how we govern, how institutions are built, and in general, how policy works, how sustainable development policy works. So, this was my chapter with Professor Sandeep Patra. Professor Sandeep Patra will talk maybe more about the quantum physics part. Um, but the point is that with these discussions, I want to start new conversations, new collaborations, and explore our inner dimensions. What is the potential of investing in exploring our inner dimensions and what that gives us? And we want to take steps toward building a more aware, resilient, and more responsible and accountable generation, so that they can take steps towards sustainable development, and ultimately, in some years, and taking baby steps one at a time, maybe we will arrive at a society where there is sustainable development, and the society is more conscious, self-aware, and compassionate. So yeah, that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. So I thank Divya a lot, because Divya has already started the most important points that we are trying to make in the chapter. I will start with a different perspective that, say, in 2023, there was a very interesting report by UNDP, we know Human Development Report, and recently we have also done a report on that, so kind of constructive criticism of that, which is now published. Now that report very clearly maintains that if we are at all serious about resolving what they call as complexity of crisis, starting from water shortage to climate crisis to financial crisis, whatever, then certainly we have to take into consideration insights from science. So whatever science, mainly they're calling upon cognitive science, complexity science, etc., behavioral sciences, physical sciences, of course. But then that becomes the most important question to us, that, okay, science is at the center, there is no doubt, if we really want to resolve modern world problems, but what kind of science? And that is actually what propelled us for writing this chapter. So what kind of science we are looking at? So unfortunately, what has happened that for the last 3-4 decades at least, since the Second World War, and there is a lot of sociological literature on that now, that science, mainstream science and technology and the interface between public policy also, that has taken a very, very kind of materialistic and utilitarian turn, so to say. And this is not surprising because first of all, the basic philosophy of standard science, standard mainstream science has been what is called as objective realism, scientific realism in a very short manner. The simple point is that you are separate from nature, you are separate from what you observe, separate from what you measure, and this separation between observer and the observed, that is the scientific method, without which perhaps mainstream science cannot kind of progress. Now the problem is that if there is an objective world outside there and you can measure that, with that comes hubris, with that comes ego. Because if the objective world is outside you, then you can control that objective world. You can manipulate that objective world for your own utility. And that has been the philosophy of mainstream science, and not only science, but also of different areas of social science, and most particularly neoclassical economics. Yes, neoclassical economics has also given us a lot of important frameworks, methods, and very strong influence on public policy, but it's based on this flawed assumption of false separation. Now, there comes the importance of two things. The first of all is the rise of quantum science. So when quantum science came up in 1925, most technically saying, because 25-26 was the point where Werner Heisenberg, a very young man at that time, he wrote a paper, and from that paper, this word quantum mechanics came out. And various other luminaries, most notably Niels Bohr. Niels Bohr was the founding father, and then Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Pauli, and many others. Now, they were posing very interesting questions. Now, remember that those questions were coming up from empirical observations itself. They were not simply philosophical. Those questions were directly challenging this so-called objective realist, property realist view of science. For example, as Divya has already mentioned about holism, now in quantum physics it is very well known as entanglement. So the systems are entangled with each other, even if there are millions of light years distance between them. That's the kind of metaphor I will say. But various other things like contextuality, truth is contextual rather than a non-contextual objective truth outside you, etc. Now, when all of these questions came up, the standard view of science was deeply challenged, and we know that even a genius like Albert Einstein could not digest that, and he had long battles of ideas with Niels Bohr. Now here comes the importance of Eastern wisdom tradition. So Eastern wisdom tradition can provide further insight into that. Now I will just mention a small story here, which I came to know from my great co-author Professor Partha Ghosh, that when I hope Heisenberg or some great physicist in the quantum camp, Copenhagen camp so-called, he visited Japan. And he was very much assured that, when he will be speaking about the wonders of quantum mechanics, there will be a lot of surprise in the audience. Well, the audience was not surprised. And Heisenberg himself got very surprised. And he asked a philosopher that why is this the case? That wherever we go, people say that you are crazy. But here there is not much that kind of response. The philosopher mentioned that, well, we are not spoiled by Aristotle. So, the logical framework that we are coming from is perfectly okay with quantum mechanics. And there is a deeper Eastern philosophical underlining there. So since Eastern philosophical underlining, whether we call it Advaita or Buddhist traditions, which we have mentioned in the book, they come from a non-binary, non-binary logical framework of the world, where true and false is not only the state, but unmanifest is equally important as true and false, and contextuality and so on. That is why we found that, well, we have to talk about this interface between Eastern wisdom traditions and modern science, because both can enrich each other. It is not something like saying that they have the ultimate answer and don't respect the other. That is not the point. The whole point of holism is that we are not separate. And that is very well understood by this dialogue which is going on between Eastern wisdom traditions and science. So in the chapter we have mentioned that. I will just mention one particular stream of thought because brevity of time. That is one particular interpretation of quantum physics, which is often known as relational quantum mechanics. Now that has been pioneered by Carlo Rovelli, one of the topmost scientists in our days. And he is also aware of some of the works that are going on in our center. So he brings in Buddhism. So one particular tradition of Buddhism, which is often called as Madhyamaka, or the middle path, where there is the central concept of codependence. So there one process cannot be thought independently of the other process. It is only when there is codependence you can think about the world. Otherwise, it becomes meaningless. It is a very profound logic system. It's often called as Sunnavada and so on of Nagarjuna. So he brings in that to modern science and he says that, well, you see, that what is a property? So say, for example, I'm holding this mic and the color of the mic is black, but it is only black when I observe that. So this observation and observed, this wholeness can never be ignored. There is no objective property out there. Now, all the properties are relational properties, and that has to get into the equations, theoretically saying. Otherwise, we cannot really think about a different kind of science. So these were the theoretical motivations, I should say, which came into the paper. But then the question is that, well, if we really want to do different kind of science, then we have to get into public policy also. Because ultimately, we need to have the impact. Otherwise, it will remain as kind of like just theoretical thinking. And in this chapter also, and in the other works that we are doing at our center, we are calling it a different framework as integral public policy. And integral public policy is bringing in these different areas from Eastern wisdom traditions, modern science, and so on, and trying to link all of this in a practical manner. We are using a framework called as Ken Wilber's meta-integral theory. Perhaps Professor Singh might reflect on that more. That is one point. And finally, I would just like to mention that consciousness studies, that has becoming a kind of like a very important thing in modern science. Long time, consciousness was ignored. There's a very interesting book written very recently. The name is Galileo's Mistake. So Galileo, when he, the founding father of Western science in some sense, along with René Descartes. So when he came up with his, objective realist view in some sense, in his equations or in his thought, we are left out, or say our consciousness is left out, our participation is left out. Can that be brought in? So very recently we have one interesting framework in neuroscience, which is pioneered by Donald Kahneman. And Don actually came to our center some time back and gave a lecture. So their point is that this whole mainstream thinking of emergent consciousness, that matter first and then somehow consciousness will emerge from that, that is flawed. So maybe we can think the other way around. So why not think that universe is within consciousness? You need to start with consciousness. And in that way, consciousness becomes a common thread between whatever we do, whatever, so social science, natural science, whichever sphere we work in. Yes, this is just a work in progress. There's no doubt about that. Finally, I will say that my own works with Professor Partha Ghosh and others, we are trying to harness the kind of interlinkages between some traditions like Sadvada in Jainism and quantum physics and modern science, because it is utmost important that we think about science in a different way. Now, some time back with Professor Chandan Nandi, I was discussing also about the influence of other factors on why science became like this. Not simply this philosophical is always there, and that is also the influence of financial capitalism and the way capitalism emerged in the whole world. And that gave rise to this whole issue of kind of utilitarianism very much. So success and branding and all of that became the main goal of science and technology. So hopefully Eastern wisdom tradition will try to challenge that and try to come up with an alternative framework, but then more integrative rather than a divisive framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. I now invite Professor Pooja Sharma to join us on stage.
A very warm greetings, everyone. I take this opportunity to thank Professor Naresh, Divya, to give this opportunity to contribute the book, chapter in the book. And I extend my warm regards to Professor Sudarshan, Dr. Sriram, and all the Dr. Sudeep, and Mr. Chandan on the dais. So this is one of the chapter which I have contributed in the book, which is Public Policy for Sustainable Development, a Gandhian Paradigm. So I have collected made some slides so that it becomes easier and clear to the viewers that initially we have said, and all the contributors have already given the background, that because of the climate change, environmental, ecological degradation, the world is captivated because all these challenges, inequality, conflict, unrest. So on economic front, what we are facing is excessive consumerism and economic growth, and have ignored a lot of fundamental aspects of welfare, non-materialistic well-being, and environmental sustainability. Socio-political dimension we have ignored, and we have, as a development discourse, there is poverty, unequal distribution, socio-economic exclusion, and so on. So what aspects of human ethics, equity, and inclusivity have been compromised and disregarded? So there is a tremendous disconnect and gap that has been created between the public policy and human well-being. So in this context, United Nations emphasized the importance of public services as the SDGs, and they said that public institutions have a greater role to play, which can be mobilized to implement SDGs. And the effective and equitable distribution of quality services for achieving SDGs is plausible, and it is with the robust public policy mechanism which is to be done. So with the effective public policy role that is coming up for us, all of us, it will not be able to ensure the sustainable development goal and sustainable development pathways the way we have taken forward our development processes. Based on the spiritual inquiry, ethical value judgment, cosmic interdependence, and the Gandhian notion. In this chapter, I talk about the Gandhian notion that constitutes the building block for the non-violent socio-economic system guided by empathy and law of non-possession. In addition, these attributes of empathy and non-possession develop a profound, inseparable balance between the ecology, humanity, and environment. Ethical responsibility is not just limited to the socio-economic and political system, but also to the environmental, ecological sustainability. Here, in Gandhian ideology, advocates that self-governance is the key for self-transformation. Political governance is driven by service for mankind or humanity, guarding and protecting the dignity and self-respect of every individual. Keeping this in mind, the present development processes has resulted into a lot of failure to understand non-use value, non-materialistic, altruistic value of both living and non-living natural entities, and spiritually evolved self acknowledges the truth of mankind. And that is why service to humanity and all that has to recognize the essence of altruistic value and its recognition. Indivisibility of superconsciousness, that is the key for the behind the thought process. And selfless service is not only the humans for the humans, but for the ecosystem altogether. So public policy that is driven by the force of self-enhancement and realization that connects, synthesizes with the human and non-human interactions selflessly is required for revolutionary development paradigm which has to be brought into the process. An underlying notion of Gandhian models, which I will talk about quickly. There are so many concepts which I will not go into the details, but they unfold the complexities of public policy, conflict resolution, social justice and law, environmental and ecological sustainability at the same time. So with this, so I'll just quickly go to the notion of super consciousness, which is proposed as a state of mind that can acquire knowledge through the meditation and other related practices. So once we are into that state of super consciousness, such practices are placed under the scope of prism of spirituality. It leads to indivisibility of super consciousness that entails the human consciousness is connected naturally to one another and also to ecology. If that is one, we are connected in that aspect, then all the challenges we have with us are also interconnected. With this logic, spirituality is also taken as, in other views, spirituality is also taken as a devoid of time and space. Therefore, the complexities related to sustainable development must be handled in the context which is free from time and space. What it means is that, like, dimensions of sustainable development should be in sync with each other so that they stand by irrespective of time and space. So the present development models are devoid of well-meant. That's what I propose in the chapter, that therefore there is a need to transform such a development framework that has resulted into development, which is devoid of well-meant, which is safety, ingenious and hurtless. Well-meant is a stage of progress based on the decisions and actions intended to kind and to help people. And in other words, those decisions in the system that are directed towards well-being of all that should be implemented. So Gandhian philosophy, the values of transformation that involves like Sarvodaya, Satyagraha, and I will not go in detail to all of them. So the spiritual, another thought process which is discussed is that spirituality could be viewed as a journey from outer world to the inner world. This journey of inner self towards self-upliftment could be thought as to be the socio-economic development of the society and humankind as a whole. Spiritual endeavor is a journey towards the evolution of human beings, while sustainable development is a pathway to achieve the overall development of socio-economic system and sustains human life. So spirituality is a process of evolution from within, which is considered as bliss or euphoria, while sustainable development is a journey that takes the sustainable growth or a state of, towards the state of general equilibrium. So there is a comparison between both the journeys, but they are interconnected within themselves. So the state of general equilibrium, which from economics we call it as Pareto optimality in welfare economics, it is the state we try to come across in the outer world. But in spirituality, we're trying to attain bliss within ourselves. So how is it possible to have it without separately, not in connecting within each other? Therefore, there exists a massive potential of synchronizing both the pathways of growth and upliftment in order to, in other words, significantly correlation between them exists. And spiritually, it is underlying phenomena of development process that aspires to achieve overall upliftment of humanity and mankind. So Gandhian philosophy that values the interconnectedness and true self becomes instrumental in the ethical transformation. This evolved transformation or the consciousness is perceived as a paradigm shift. Moreover, the self-transformation and manifestation of this reality of truth is what is embedded in Gandhian philosophy. Of Satyagraha, Sarvodaya, you can take any name. All of them are embedded by the self-upliftment and transformation, inquiry towards the truth and ethical value system. This is what it is based on, and service towards mankind. So Gandhian models, I'll quickly see if, we have, till now we have had the unsustainable growth like more accumulation of wealth, unprecedented possession of resources, unchecked capitalism, concentration of wealth in the hands of few, political economy that plays, and all keeping that into mind, there's so many authors which have pointed out that we have failed utterly on the basis of inequality, keeping up catch-up effect that all the growth will lead to equality once again. So we have come up with failure of Kuznets curve, and so many other events, and authors have pointed out the negativities. So the basic object of decent work, so how I'm relating all the notions of Gandhian thought with SDGs. This is how I have shown, I think you can see it in this particular Sarvodaya. The principle of Sarvodaya, which has been coined by Gandhi, it actually caters to SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 10 of reduced inequalities, SDG 3 for good health and well-being. Similarly, another movement, there have been so many movements related to Sarvodaya, like Bhudana Andolan, and the notion of commons, common ownership, etc. Then we have another trusteeship model that caters to so many other SDGs, like SDG 1 again, no poverty, SDG 2. The notion of non-possessiveness, which is that you are just the owner, the trustees of whatever we have in this world, and we do not have this notion of ownership to anything. So this notion, along with the economy of permanence philosophy of J.C. Kumarappa, which tells us to look beyond time and space. And this is what spirituality is also thinking about. The time and space is, the world is limited by time and space, and our life, which is just a span of 70 years, falls short of the nature. So keeping nature as more permanent as compared to us, we have no right to consume from nature, thinking that it is owning anything. So all the consumption and production processes which take the limited resources which are transient are unsustainable, but the permanent sources which are air, water, and which are embedded in the nature as a free flow, they maintain the continuity of life. And continuity of life has been compared in the chapter to cradle sustainability, that you will read and you understand that how all the notions coming up like cradle to cradle philosophy, sustainability processes, they are all embedded in Gandhian thoughts. Economy of permanence, he's dealing with SDG 11, SDG 12, SDG 13, and so on. And then the last, decentralization, consensus-based system, which actually leads us to the system which is peaceful existence, which respects each other's wants. And this is the diagram which actually connects that if you want to do any policy change or public policy movement, if it is a decentralized, then it will lead to a less concentration of power, equal distribution of wealth, peace, tolerance, respect to humankind, and it will lead to a non-violent economy, while rest of the characteristics build up the violent economy. And there are so many decentralized systems existing in, you can say, community of Arc in France, in Gandhian principle-based. There are decentralized villages in places like Medha village in Maharashtra, which are coexisting peacefully. And they are dealing and actually complying by SDG 11 and 12 of Sustainable Development Goals. Nai Talim, which is an education system, which I must all quickly mention that the new education policy which has come up is completely based on Nai Talim, which is a remarkable illustration of manifesting traditional knowledge of spirituality, academics, and life skills in a child. True meaning of connection of ecology has been the main motive of Nai Talim, which was introduced by Gandhian thoughts. The skill originate from philosophy of reducing, reusing, and recycling, and provide the livelihood to the child. Gandhi was equally aware of inculcating good sanitary habits among the people, and was biggest advocate of use of biogas and manure cooking. All the ashrams are based on that, and his reverence for life and respect for animals were always there. And then we can easily see that to promote lifelong learning from the sustainable habits which are inculcated in a child, and that attains your livelihood also. So it is catering both the skill for life as well as skill for living. So sustainable component of Nai Talim is a remarkable component which caters to SDG 4. So like this, I'm just finishing with the thought that Satyagraha is again a remarkable process. So I can go on to so many thought process of Gandhian thoughts which have embedded political way of running the public policy systems, which are based on completely self-transformation, non-possessiveness of resources around, and they are connected to interconnectedness of every world ecology and the human, non-human world, altruistic world, and that is holistic as one. And then I will just quickly finish up. Sorry for taking a lot of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. I will now hand it over for you to initiate the discussion.
So, a few reflections from the conversation that we just had, and my past reading, which was of these chapters, which was speed reading. I couldn't have helped it because these are lengthy chapters and extremely, not very difficult, but certainly very challenging in order to sort of absorb so many ideas in one go and at a time. So when I first turned the pages of the introductory chapter written by Dean Naresh Singh and Assistant Professor Divya Bhatnagar, there was an almost instant connect. I expected jaw-breaking jargon. Instead, I encountered sagely suggestions. Only spiritual minds can conceive, realize, and offer solutions that can lead to sustainable development. 2, the problems that we are now faced with are many, and they are seemingly insolvable. Dean Singh and Divya have listed some in their introductory chapter. One being, how do you grapple with such seemingly insurmountable problems, the root cause of which is us? One cannot achieve sustainability within the current development growth paradigm. That is clear. Otherwise, the world wouldn't be afflicted with the very problems listed by the authors. There's a British journalist, and a pretty famous one at that. His name is George Monbiot. 5 years ago, during an interview, in the context of climate change, global warming, and the havoc that is being played about, he said, and I beg your pardon for using a particular word, but that is important in this particular context. He said, and I quote him, "Stop pissing around the margins of the problem." He was aggressive. And then he went on to say, since when was GDP a sensible measure of human welfare? Having said this, I would move to the other authors. What are the authors really advocating from a spiritual perspective is take it easy, slow down, distribute, and don't concentrate. And I quote from one of the chapters, preventing environmental breakdown and systemic collapse means challenging our deepest and least examined beliefs. That to me is Dean Singh and Divya's understanding of spirituality and public policy. We have had long conversations, Sudeep and myself, and when he first broached the issue with me, he threw in some difficult words. All of this stuff that he has accumulated from his knowledge of physics sounded very alien to me, very foreign to me. But when we really got down to discussing some of the difficult problems that we are encountering, capitalism being one, is it sustainable? Certainly not. But then you are immediately faced with another question as far as India is concerned. India has just taken off on its growth path. We began from 1991 onwards, let's say, and our model always centralizes GDP as the key element in our growth. We just say that GDP cannot be the most defining element of growth. However, Sudeep and I agreed that the problem is to go beyond capitalism and see whether there's an alternative model that is going to address not only people's problems, but solve some of the problems and that humanity is faced with. My question to the panel would be, first one, and anybody could answer this, do you expect a clash of visions and ideas in the future? Because the entrenched powers that there are will not allow things or will not let go things so easily. What do you expect to encounter in the future, in the event, the model of a spirituality leading to sustainable development, if that is to be considered? Second question is, India, I mean, I'll take off from my point on India. India has just taken off on its supposed economic growth. We hear that day in and day out, not only from political actors, but also from economic actors, and certainly from business captains. GDP is the byword. So how quickly, if at all, do you think India will take to the spiritual path that will reconcile economic development with sustainable development? These are primarily two questions that have come to my mind. There are a couple of others. One is for Pooja. Pooja, you mentioned about the Gandhian form of sort of giving primacy to the Gandhian form of development, if I may call it. How do you think this is going to play out in a scenario where almost everything is market driven, even politics to that for that matter? So primarily these three questions, only for, I'm sorry, Divya cannot hear us, but Dean Singh, Sudeep and Pooja, yes. Thank you.
We have to be very brief. I will have to leave very soon, like many of you, to get home. So very quickly, and we will try to also have a few questions from the floor. But if I react to this very quickly, the first thing is whether there will be a clash of visions. There is already a clash of visions. I think the real problem is addiction rather than a clash of visions, and human beings are currently addicted to materialism. So we'll have to find an antidote to addiction. How do human beings leave their addiction? I mean, this materialism is worse than cocaine right now. They cannot do or think anything different. And I think that is the inward journey that we are talking about. And they're not going to do it on their own, and so we'll have to get public policy to help. So that's how I see it happening, but maybe with that quick comment, maybe you open up the floor before we come back to our...
Well, I think questions are welcome from the audience. Sure. I'll begin with him. Sorry.
Yes, indeed, it's very, what should one say? Looking at the problem from a very different angles and perspectives. And plurality is expected, and that is there, it seems, in the book. But I would say that, I mean, there has been a dilemma, or rather a divide between intuition and intellect, epistemologically also. And the whole thing, where we are located in the 21st century right now, vis-a-vis the climate change and climate emergency at that, I think need is to demystify. And Gandhi's example here can be taken as illustration. He demystified when he took the critique of what he very carefully described as modern Western industrialism. He didn't discard all modern, not all industry. Modern Western industrialism And that paradigm, and he didn't have much time to go into all that in the, in the rush of freedom movement. But I think demystifying is a need of our, and if all the science tells you, and Gandhi at that has demystified the spirituality of the elite. Gandhi is the one person who is religious and never goes to any temple. When he goes to Uttarakhand and Pant tells him to go to Badrinath, Kedarnath, Gandhiji says, what do I will do? And he sits and writes Anasakti Yoga there. So here is a powerful example, and which has been handed over to Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King. Why do we take our cue from that? And bottom line at the end of the day is respectful reverence for nature. And the challenge before humanity is to save the remaining natural capital. And if you have to do it, I think going into all the realms of spirituality, where you will find a very powerful stance of this thinking, that thinking. But you need to demystify, and as science and the public policy, as you have very rightly said, has to play a didactic role, because time is running out. Time is and overriding thing of the Brundtland report was, whatever you have to do is now and here. I was present when the report was written.
I have a request to make. If you can, Dean Singh has to take a flight, so if you can be a little more.
Yes, the world of the flight. So, but world is in a real flight, and you need to demystify. In the name of spirituality, we should not again confuse the masses and have the street answer. I think the need of the hour is to have a pathway and paradigm of development which is just, humane, equitable and sustainable.
Thank you.
Gandhi's example.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Sharik, you had a question? All right. Okay, we'll go with the ladies first.
Okay. So basically, there was a very interesting presentation by Professor Sriram Chola on like spirituality and Eastern spirituality. So indeed, I want to agree that India has a great spiritual philosophical tradition, which is very ancient, which comes from like more than 2,000 and even 3,000 years ago. And it's absolutely valuable and applicable for sustainability as well as other Asian countries like Japan, for example. But at the same time, I would say it's true also that unfortunately at the moment, materialistic paradigm dominates Western science and even philosophy. However, if you look in historical perspective, like European culture, contemporary European culture is about 2,500 years old. And in its cradle, in its appearance, like we see the giants like Plato, like Plotinus, like Dionysius Areopagitus. So if you look at the whole entire history, it's only since 19th century that materialism suddenly became mainstream and idealism became the opposition party. But don't dismiss the opposition party, it can also become mainstream. So there are powerful opposition thinkers like Ken Wilber, like Carl Gustav Jung, like Abraham Maslow, like transpersonal psychology, like integral thinking. So I think if you look at European tradition in its whole, in its entire history, it can very productively cooperate with Indian tradition. It has a lot of overlaps, especially Plato, Platonism, Nicholas of Cusa. If you look at Nicholas of Cusa, who was a spiritual philosopher and mathematician, and who was the first to apply the mathematical notion of infinity to understanding the nature of the absolute. So it's a German idealist dialectics and the great German idealist philosophy with Schelling, Hegel, Nikolai Hartmann, Eduard Hartmann, philosophy of unconscious, so on. So I just wanted to bring this complexity, and indeed there is a struggle, and indeed it's not clear what will become out of it.
Some of the ancient civilizations are on a sort of a point of no return sort of a path. Look at China. Look at India now. China has an even older history. And the kind of consumption that China is into, how do we reconcile that? Look at India. We have just taken off. Are we going to slow down? I think these are the questions that the book sort of responds to in a way. And you had a question there. Can we have the lady?
Hi, thank you very much for fantastic presentations. Just a quick, what is not very clear to me is to see to what extent do you relate your ideas, because if I look on, in 1973 already, Ernest, the Norwegian philosopher, coins the term shallow ecology. Says it is anthropocentric, it focuses on finding concrete technical and technological environmental solutions, meaning employs reductionist scientific knowledge. And called to embrace deep ecology, which is a non-anthropocentric. It brings about new moral reasoning instead of utilitarianism or Kantian categorical imperative reasoning. It brings about various different ideas of expansion of the I with the world. So most of the things that I've heard, to a large extent, and deep ecology itself. So first of all, are you saying, okay, we need to shift to deep ecology, because this is exactly what they said in 1973 or in 84 with the platform of the deep ecology ideas, which also became a movement. So it's already a movement, it's already a philosophy. And so to what extent, what kind of new things do you bring about into this dialogue?
All right. Okay, Sharik, do you want to, or to pass the mic to Sharik, please, and then to him?
Yeah, yes.
Sure? Okay.
All right, thank you very much for the talk. So actually, just like Feynman has said, Richard Feynman, there is a plenty of scope at the bottom, referring to the blue wavelength. I will say there is a plenty of scope to this concept as well. And since last few centuries, we have seen the rise of individualism coupled with materialism and so on. And we have diverted from our natural disposition and our trajectory from Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, or it's like Hal Jazao Lesan, we have diverted from that path. So coming back to the application side, I would say there is a lot of things, and as I just said, there is a plenty of scope. So there are climate change denials, there is government-industry nexus, there is industry and science nexus, right? At some scale, at some places. So how to deal with them while bringing this concept as a holistic thing for the public welfare, not just for some in the capital, like 80-20 rule or Pareto law.
Manasa, you might like to take the mic to this gentleman here.
Good evening. My heartiest compliments to Professor Naresh ji, Divya ji, and the whole team for bringing out such a wonderful book and very nice presentations. So I'd like to say there is never a conflict in material need and the spiritual need. Sometimes, if the more money is with a person who has a spiritual bent of mind, it is good for the world. Like we talk about, a bird flying. Bird flies with the two wings. So one wing is like the wing of materiality and one is of the spirituality. But the question is that the spirituality is understood not in a proper way. Sometimes it is very much confused with the terms of religiosity and like that. But somehow what is happening in the educational institution, we are teaching exactly the opposite. There is so much focus on the avidya. There is a learning for living. And that is being so much glorified that if you get a better job, bigger car, so many this, so many of that is taken as more fashionable. So, Swantaya Sukhaya, the Santosha Parodharma, all these things are missing. And there is a problem. It is not only at the level of a student, but also at the level of their parents, also at the level of the teachers and the whole society. So it is not like a one thing, like if you only change the education system, but if you are having not just a teacher, but the gurus there who are, filled with, self-love, self-awareness, and the environment where you are nurturing both the vidya and avidya, not only the left brain, reason and logic, but also the right brain, which is talking about love and empathy and compassion, and a worldview, Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Santu Niramaya, and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and like that. So how that can be done, and especially in an institution like a business school, where you promote greed, where you promote hinsa, violence, where you promote those kind of a thing, which is taken as greed is good. So, they will go and create bigger marketing campaigns. You do that and that. So that is also failing campaign like Mission Life by PM Modi. So how to really resolve this conflict? That is my question. Thank you.
Professor Nandi talked about tracing a path, and we are trying to trace a path towards a more sustainable future by implementing spirituality-inspired public policy. But in that quest, while we attempt to trace a pathway by applying these spirituality-inspired knowledge forms, do we also run the risk of making it more rhetorical in nature? Because why is spirituality? Because spirituality, as Sir said, spirituality and materialism go hand in hand. In Siddhartha, by Hermann Hesse, Siddhartha could not learn about spirituality till he was materially fallen. So I simply, there is only one fear that I have, is that while we try to trace a pathway, but if we don't inculcate spiritual practice with that, so then Brahman, oneness, everything becomes just words, they're not implemented in practice. If we try to control it ourselves rather than being, more ground-driven rather than top-driven, that is my concern.
So, can I?
So this is regarding the policies, public policy driven by spirituality, which is how do you tackle with the market system? So market, it is not rejecting the market. Gandhian philosophy also did not reject the market. It is actually saying that policies should be at the decentralized level. Decentralized is a small level where every citizen and the individual is able to convince his or her living through its consensus. And when, obviously the entire phenomena he's talking about is the evolution, the spiritual evolution. When a person is spiritually involved, definitely his choices will differ. And he will act and choose according to the spiritual driven pathway. And when the public policy is driven in from the trusteeship model and the other models which proposed, it will be a decentralized level, given empowering every community. So automatically that concentration of power, mass production, everything will fall in places. And then this is what the idea of Gandhian thoughts is all about, practically.
Okay. Thank you. I think that many very deep points were raised in the question answer or reflection section, I should say. And I would like to respond to some of them which were kind of coming to me. One is what Tatania also raised, that we need to also rethink the European thinking also. And European thinking is certainly not all about crude materialism and so on. It's a vast world. And to this end, I will say that very recently there has been an interesting book which we requested, and the library has it now. The name is a bit provocative, Quantum International Relations. Now, this book has come out from Oxford University Press. Now, the first few chapters actually goes back to a very interesting contemporary history. It says that even in 1920s and 25, the scientists and philosophers and people who are working in Eastern wisdom traditions, they were having a lot of conversations with each other. Now, Tatania mentioned about Carl Jung. So Carl Jung had a long conversation with Pauli, Wolfgang Pauli, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, and a new book has also come out on their worldview. Unfortunately, that totally stopped after the Second World War. And that is the contemporary history which Chandanda was also mentioning, the rise of financial capitalism and mixing with science. So that was the structural shift which was happening more towards materialism. But again, we can get back to our contemporary history itself. We need not to always go back to thousands of years. The second point I would like to mention about what Professor Pankaj Gupta mentioned very rightly, that there is always a very misconception about spirituality, and that has also caused a lot of damage, you know. And what we are trying to show in many of our works is that there can be concrete frameworks, very concrete, logical and mathematical, if you want to say, based frameworks of spirituality which can give insights to science. There's nothing like kind of high talking and high mystifying as a demystification point came up. We are exactly trying to do that. It is possible. And finally, Sharik mentioned Richard Feynman. I don't know how much Richard Feynman was spiritual, but his point was absolutely correct, that there is always a lot of space at the bottom. And he was mainly nanotechnology. He was mainly, but yes, here we have, here we don't even have lot of space, we have infinity of space.
But will ethical and moral not take care of your spirit?
Yeah, that is why we are calling for a new approach to science.
Right, so most has been said already. I'll just wrap it up from my perspective and then turn it back to the moderator. See, I am not thinking at all of replacing anything that has worked. Deep ecology has brought tremendous value, and it's great. It has recognized the intrinsic value of every life form. Nature has an intrinsic value, and so on. It's not only there for exploitation by man. All of that. We are calling for humans to transform themselves. You see, I am not in the business of managing the environment. I was trained as an environmental scientist, and I recognized right away that we were dealing with humans managing themselves. It was not about environmental management. For me, environmental management is a misnomer. It's because we are mismanaging ourselves. So the problem is us, and it's transformation of our consciousness. Finding that value is what we are talking about. And it must happen both ways, fully agreed. The spiritual practice is required for individual transformation, but it will not be enough. Public policy must help to drive it. And that's what we are calling for. So I think we can leave it at that.
Yes, as you say, public policy. Us means it is a very amorphous category.
Let me just add to that.
Yeah. Us is a category, and 90% of the humanity is not causing damage to the only 10%.
No, let me just add one word on that. See, what would public policy look like if the goal is increased love in the society and not increases in GDP? One rabbi, a Jewish leader in America, has written a book called Revolutionary Love. There are many books coming out like this. So it's a fundamental revolution in public policy that we are calling for, and I have full appreciation. It will not happen in my lifetime, and maybe in many of my students' lifetime, but we have to sow the seeds.
Yeah, quickly. I mean, that reminded me of this Western band called U2, which is led by a man called Bono, and the kind of views that he has on development, modernity, capitalism, and all that. These are there in patches, but the question is, how do you bring them all together as part of an alternative sort of a platform? A sort of a challenge. I think that is going to be the biggest hurdle as far as mainstreaming this concept and this philosophy is concerned. Thank you very much for attending today's book discussion. We can now have some tea outside. Thank you.